Hello everyone, and welcome to Game 10 from the 1960 World Chess Championship match between Mikhail and Mikhail Botvinnik. Now, you probably remember from my video about Game 8, Tal and Alexander Koblenz had this brilliant idea that Tal should go all out, try and win one more game, as if he had a 4-point lead in the match, then that lead would be practically impossible for Botvinnik to overcome. But Tal lost game number 8, and then in game number 9 he ran straight into Botvinnik's home preparation against that sacrifice. Tal had on e6, so that was a pretty brilliant game by Botvinnik, and now instead of being 3 points in the lead, now Tal is still 1 point in the lead, but as Tal says that he doesn't feel like he's in the lead. He starts that this is like a whole new match, as now he faces a new, improved, confident Botvinnik that won the previous 2 games, and now again Botvinnik has the white pieces, and Tal really has to figure out what to do here. So Botvinnik played d4, and Tal says that he didn't really know what to prepare for this game, but he did have an idea that for some reason he thought that Botvinnik would definitely go for the Saemisch variation against the King's Indian, as in some of the games Botvinnik played knight to f3 on the second move, kind of showing that he's not really interested in the Saemisch variation, and it's exactly this move order that kind of gave Tal the insight that Botvinnik will indeed go for the Saemisch variation. So knight to f6, c4, g6, the King's Indian defense, knight to c3, bishop to g7, now e4, d6, this is the classic line, and here Botvinnik plays f3, so he does go for the Saemisch variation. We have castles, bishop to e3, now e5, d5, and c6. Queen to d2, c captures on d5, and c captures on d5. Here Tal kind of just mentions it for a short time in the book, that knight captures on d5 isn't really good for white, because white can never win this d6 pawn. Point being that after knight to c6 and castles, you'll never get to win the d6 pawn because of simply knight to d4. And now after bishop captures, bishop to e6. Queen moves, and now e captures on d4, and black is much better in this position. So after c captures on d5, c captures on d5, and now a6. A useful move, preparing b5 in the future, not allowing any of white's pieces to occupy the b5 square. And here Botvinnik plays g4. We have knight b to d7, and here knight g to e2. This is the position as Tal did prepare the King's Indian defense against the Saemisch variation for this match, and for this game in particular. Tal picked a couple of games, and specifically one game he played against Gligoric in Portorož in 1958 in the interzone tournament, because Tal had this position as white and Gligoric had this position as black. So in that game, h4 was played by Tal, and Gligoric followed with h5, and it was a decent game. Black didn't really have any problems. So after this knight b to d7, Botvinnik first plays knight to e2. He prepares knight to g3. So if h5 will be played in the future, then g captures on h5 will be an idea, as the knight will also support the h5 square. So Tal immediately goes for h5. And here, there was this position on the board plenty of times in the past, and here white usually had 3 main ideas. It was g captures on h5, pushing the pawn to g5, or defending with h3. But in this game, Botvinnik goes for the never before seen, or so Tal thought, as he'd never seen this move before, bishop to g5. And he didn't know, was this bishop to g5 an idea he just found over the board, or was it a really home preparation? But later he will kind of think that it was an over-the-board decision, but you can never really tell with Botvinnik, because sometimes Botvinnik will think for 10 minutes about a move that he already prepared at home. So here Tal played h captures on g4, f captures on g4, and here knight to c5 by Tal. Now immediately piling up on that e4 pawn, queen to a5 will be an idea in the future. And here for his next move, Botvinnik thought for 25 minutes, and in the end he decided to play knight to g3. He decided to sacrifice the pawn on g4. But there were a lot of things to consider. I mean, you can't really protect the g4 pawn with something like h3, because you lose the e4 pawn. Knight captures, and now simply knight captures. You attack the queen on d2. Bishop captures on d8, knight captures on d2. Now bishop to c7, attacking the d6 pawn. Now knight to f3 check, king attacks knight, and now e4, defending the knight and also opening up the attack to the b2 pawn. Bishop captures, now rook attacks bishop, bishop moves, and now bishop captures on b2, and black gains a very, a decent position, being a pawn up, and white didn't achieve anything here. So after this knight to c5 move, Botvinnik decides to sacrifice the g pawn, but by playing knight to g3 and defending the e4 pawn. So bishop captures on g4, Tal accepts it, and now b4, attacking the knight. Knight moves to d7, we have h3 now, bishop to f3 attacking the rook, and now rook to h2. And now the rook will be a lot more active on h2 than it was on h1, and here the bishop on f3 isn't really doing all that much, even though black is up a pawn. So here a5, and Tal says this a5 was a completely... it wasn't really in the spirit of the position. Tal thought that it creates... It creates some opportunities on the queen side, but actually later he suggests that queen to b6 would definitely have been a better move, going for that b4 pawn, also preparing queen to d4, so this would have been better, as Tal suggests. But in the game a5 was played, and here Botvinnik played b5. Tal played this sharp a5, with the idea that if Botvinnik plays queen to e3, attacking Tal's bishop on f3, then Tal could go for a nice piece sacrifice, with a captures on b4, knight to b5, and now knight captures on d5, attacking the queen. Pawn captures, and now bishop to f6. Now, if you capture on f3, you lose the bishop on g5. So after queen captures on f3, bishop captures on g5, knight captures on d6, now white is practically lost. This was the position that Tal says, and it's a double-edged position where black really gets a lot for the piece as f5 is coming, and the point being that you can't capture this knight because of rook to a3, and it's a very sharp position. Queen has to move, also queen has to protect the knight on g3, so after the queen moves, now knight checks, king moves, now knight to f6, attacking the knight on d6, knight moves, queen captures on d5 with check, knight moves, and now other rook comes into the game, and now all of black's pieces are eyeing the king and the knight there. It's white is completely lost here. So a lot of ideas to this a5 move by Tal, but Botvinnik completely ignores it, and he simply pushes b5. So queen to b6 by Tal, and here queen to f2. And this is where Tal really thought that even though he's up a pawn, Botvinnik really knows what he's doing, as if the queens come off the board, then the game will practically be transferred to the queen side, and Tal's pieces are kind of stuck on the king side, so this could favor Botvinnik a lot. So here Tal exchanges immediately on f2. Maybe a better decision would have been bishop to h5, and then allowing Botvinnik to capture the queen on b6, following knight captures on b6. But okay, Tal doesn't mention this idea. So queen captures, rook captures, and now bishop to h5. We have b6 now, and b6 was an over-the-board decision. It's hard to say was it the strongest move, but it was definitely the strongest practical move, as it really creates a weakness here. This a5 pawn is now a weakness, the b7 pawn is now a weakness, and the b6 pawn really makes things a lot harder. Of course, you can't capture it, because then you lose the knight on f6. Here, rook f to c8 was played. We have knight to b5 attacking the d6 pawn, and now knight to e8, simply defending the pawn. And here knight captures on h5, and Tal says that this wasn't the best move, because okay, you do want to capture it, but this knight on g3 actually had a very nice purpose. It was protecting the e4 pawn. Better was hard to say if it was better, but if you go rook to e3 to defend the b6 pawn, then black has this very annoying bishop to f6 move, and after you capture now on h5, now black has bishop to h4, pinning that rook, and you don't really have a square to retreat to with your knight. So after we play a move, bishop captures, pawn captures, now you're just down the exchange, and black is winning this game. So after this knight to e8 move, Botvinnik did play knight captures on h5, but Tal recommends the very sneaky rook to b1. That this was better for Botvinnik and that it gave white better chances. The idea is now if you capture knight captures, now you get knight captures on d6, knight captures and rook captures, and this position is fine for white. His pieces will become active, the other rook is coming into the game also, so maybe an improvement, but okay. After knight to e8, Botvinnik did play knight captures on h5, we have g captures on h5, and bishop to e3 now defending the b6 pawn. Now Tal has knight to c5, and now you see that the pawn on e4 is attacked, and Botvinnik has to exchange bishop for a knight here. So bishop captures, rook captures, and now bishop to d3. Rook a to c8, now Tal doubles up on the c file. We have king to e2, rook to c1, trading rooks, rook captures, and rook to f1, offering a trade of the other rook as well. Tal, of course, declines this, rook to c5, as he doesn't want to trade even the rook, as Tal's pieces are kind of stuck on the king side, for now at least. So rook to b1, bishop to f6, and now knight to a3. This bishop to f6 was actually a powerful defensive move by Tal that was stopping the knight to a7 idea. Because if knight to a7, then Tal has bishop to d8, and after this knight sacrifices itself for the pawn, pawn can actually capture it, because now after b7, now Tal has bishop to c7 stopping it, and after Botvinnik brings out a queen, bishop captures, queen captures, king to f8 defending the knight, now d captures on c6, and now king to e7. You can't grab the pawn because bishop to b5 simply wins, so king to e7, and now after rook checks, king to f6, bishop to b5, knight to c7. Attacking the bishop. Now you either capture knight and then rook captures bishop is very nice for black, or you move and then knight to e6, and black has a very nice position here. So after this bishop to f6, Botvinnik saw that this idea doesn't work. He played knight to a3. We have bishop to d8 attacking the pawn again, and now knight to c4. And knight to c4 is a great idea by Botvinnik. Botvinnik wants to get the knight to f5. But he could have done this also by playing from a3 knight to c2 to e3 to f5, and playing it to c4 is a small tactical error, which Tal immediately takes advantage of. He pushes f5, and now there's a problem. You can't play e captures on f5 because of e4. You have to move the bishop, you lose the knight, or you capture the pawn, you lose the knight this way. So after f5, knight to e3. You can't really capture it, and now Tal did consider pushing to f4, but he didn't enjoy this. He decided f captures on e4, bishop captures on e4, and now king to h8. And Tal says that this king to h8 move, making a move like this, is deadly when your opponent is really low on time. And Botvinnik was really low on time in this game. Before this is move 34, and before the 40th move was made, he had like a couple of seconds on his clock before reaching time control. King to d3 by Botvinnik, knight to f6 now, attacking the bishop. Bishop to g2, we have king back to g8, now comes a4, bishop to e7, bishop to f3, bishop to f8, rook to g1 check, king to h7, and now bishop to e4. This is Botvinnik making his 40th move. And it wasn't the greatest of moves, but it's like, as Tal says, his flag almost fell here. So Tal had to play knight captures on e4, you have king captures, and here bishop to h6. Now here Tal could have sealed a move, as the game had to be adjourned, and Tal was considering. Tal knew that rook to c3 was the strongest move in this position, and that it gave black the most chances to actually win this game, but he thought if he seals this move, then Botvinnik will have an entire night to find all the moves for each side, so it will probably be refuted. So instead, Tal played bishop to h6, and now he basically forced Botvinnik to seal a move, so Tal is the one that will have the entire night analyzing the all the possible continuations. So here the game was adjourned, Botvinnik sealed the move, and later the next day they found that Botvinnik played knight to f5, which was pretty much forced. You can't allow bishop captures. So here rook to c4 check was played, king to d3, now rook captures on a4, knight captures on d6, and now rook to d4 check. King moves, Tal plays rook captures on d5, and here we have knight to e4. Knight to e4 is a devious idea by Botvinnik. Now if you play rook to b5, to go for the pawn, simply knight f6, and you're getting checkmated, followed by rook g8 checkmate. So after knight to e4, king to h8, not allowing this, Botvinnik goes for a knight to f6, now rook to d2 check, king moves, and now rook to d8, preventing, of course, checkmate on g8. Rook to g6, attacking the bishop, and here Tal did consider a lot of moves. Probably he says that bishop to g7 was the best idea, but he decided to play a4, as he again he had a devious trap for Botvinnik. Rook captures on h6, and now king to g7, attacking both knight and rook, and now rook to h7 check. And this was one of the traps Tal set for Botvinnik. Now if Botvinnik becomes greedy and plays rook captures on h5 first, then after king captures on f6 and rook to h7, Tal has rook to b8, and Tal wins the game. It seems like a really stupid place for the rook, but actually this wins the game. Now there's no way for you to actually prevent the a4 pawn from queening. If you go rook a4, simply rook to a8, again pawn goes forward. And if you go rook to h6 to try and get the rook into the game this way, then rook moves, rook comes to d6, king to f5, but now the e pawn is also dangerous. King to e3, now comes a3, rook to d2 blocking it, rook to a8, and after rook blocks, rook to a4, and a completely winning game for black. But okay, after this king to g7 move, Botvinnik doesn't go all greedy. He goes rook to h7 check, king captures on f6, and now rook captures on b7. It's a lot more important. Tal still is up a pawn, but you know, at least now Botvinnik can maybe hold this. Rook to d3 check, king to g2, defending the pawn, and now rook to b3. Rook to a7, now comes a3, we have b7, king to f5, rook to a3, capturing the rook. Now, of course, you can't capture the rook because then the b pawn queens. Rook captures on b7, and now rook to a4. We have rook to b2 check, and here after this rook to a4, Tal knew that he was never going to win this game because you can't push e4 to gain any more space. Now simply rook to a5 check, and you have to give up the h5 pawn. King to f4, now you grab the pawn. If you don't grab it, if you defend it or something, then rook to e5. Again, there's really no way to gain any advantage from your pawn up. So after rook to a4, rook to b2 was played with check. We have king to f3, rook to b3 check, king back to g2, rook to e3, and here Botvinnik played rook to h4, and in this position Tal actually offered a draw, and a draw was agreed upon, as there is no way to make progress here. It's a theoretical draw. If you play something like king g5 at going for the rook, again rook to a4, and you can never push e4, because after rook a5 check, you're never gonna get anything out of this position. So yeah, after rook to h4, they agreed to a draw, and so Tal definitely stopped the bleeding. After losing 2 games, game 10 is a draw, and we officially, as this, I don't, okay, I'm not gonna tell you how many games this match has. Maybe some of you don't know, or some of you are maybe lazy to check it out, but we are somewhere around the half of this match. So that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. Thank you all for watching. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. And yeah, I'll try to, as I'm pretty busy with the candidates and everything, but I will try to, you know, whenever I can, to release 1 game from this match. So this is game 10. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon.